over 7 years ago. And, fortunately I didn't drown, although it's certainly at certain points it felt like that. But that's, actually what we're going to be exploring tonight is actually similar territory, because it's basically all about the mind. Yeah, the past few weeks, what we've been doing is really kind of focusing on how it is that we experience the world. And we started with our bodies, and then we moved on to our feelings, and had some real fun with that last week. And now we're moving on to this space where one could see it or choose to argue it, that of where everything seems to be coming from. So it could prove to be very, very important to understand this. I mean, not to be too short about it. I mean, really what we're doing is we're gonna have some fun tonight with seeing if we can understand the nature of the mind. Something as simple as that. And fortunately, anything is possible. So just enjoy it and relax into it. And if something comes up and you're like, what the hell does that mean? Don't hesitate to raise your hand, ask a question about it. It was amazing when I was driving over here, there were these, in the lane on the opposite side of the road was, looked like 3 huge cop cars, like in a parade. And, it's like, because I just seen a fire truck go by and so forth. But it was sort of like there were people following them, almost like, like a funeral or something like that. And then as I got, so that's initially what I was seeing. I was like, wow, what's up with these with these police cars? And as we got closer and the appearance started to change more and more, it turns out that there was a huge sleigh on the back of this cop car with Santa in it, like waving to people. I was like, man, that's awesome. Here I went from like total morbidity of, oh man, someone died, and immediately, and then I get closer and I'm like, it's Santa, just like waving to us all from a cop car. He has his entourage. And it really, it's such a fitting example of this whole exploration we've been having with appearances. All the mental appearances. And, in an instance like that, it's really easy to discern when it changes, but it's another thing when it's not as emphatic as that. It's not as stark as that. And it's much more subtle. And certainly it's proven time and time again that when we, especially last week, when we were talking about feelings, that the way that we interact with them it can be very subtle, but most of the time when we're honest about it, it seems as though our experience with whatever it is that we're feeling is of a scale that is very direct, and we know it. I'm pissed, I'm content, I'm tired, anything in between. And what's really important for us to realize is that if we put it in the context of our relationship with our body and the world, and if we see that our experience, if we look at our body, the physical body and the physical world, as a vehicle of our experience of the world, then you could see the feelings serving as the fuel of our experience. And certainly, when we were exploring this last week, and it's always good to review. It's always good to go back over this material. They seemingly, this fuel, the fuel of our feelings, seem to impact everything, impact all of our experience. And ultimately, you could look at it and say, for many of us, that our feelings do compose what the world is for us, how we experience the world. For instance, you know, when you're in love, you know, it's as though your experience of the world is through being in love. I mean, it seems as though everything else is kind of tracking off of that. You know, whatever it might be. I mean, down to, you know, whether you're working at a job or something like that. If you have this sense of falling in love with someone, that it's still informing, like, what's going on, you know, in your day and your night. And I mean, that's just how impactful they can be. And it's certainly, I mean, it was perfect last week when we had this activity we were doing where on the wall were all these shapes in particular colors. I mean, that's just it. It was just a shape and color. And one of the people was here. She was sharing what her experience was with, I think it was red. I think, wasn't that Marina was talking about red? And so for her, she had this, her whole experience ended up, she was looking at this shape of red, and she started to immediately associate this with passion and a very good time in her life and certain experiences, you know, an entire history. All just came from this looking at, I don't even know if it was a circle or a triangle that was red. And that kind of association between what is appearing to us and then the feeling that's in association with that appearance. And this is the thing, and I don't know if this got really, you know, hammered out last week, but, you know, in this context, we really would look at a feeling as being the subject of response to an appearance, to a mental appearance. And so then it's not, well, that shifts it quite a bit, doesn't it? Like, to try to unpack that. Because then it really becomes about that the feeling is a subjective response to whatever is appearing in your mind. And there's a little bit of space in there suddenly that you can kind of work with that a bit differently. That what's arising, that, so in other words, that the feeling is not baked into the appearance, you know, that's arising in our mind or in the object, but there's something now there where there's space enough to be able to work with your response to what's appearing to you. I mean, just as though when I was seeing, you know, Santa, you know, on his sleigh, like it shifted like that. But initially, this is the thing, is like initially when I was seeing this and I had this story going of what the appearance was and the feelings that started to arise with that, you know, I started making decisions and choices, as we all do, when the feeling starts to arise in relationship to whatever the object is or whatever the appearance is. But more or less, it's when we're probably going through something that's really deeply afflicted, that if you have that kind of sensibility, that this is a response, but it isn't whatever that appearance is. So, and that's, you know, there's subtlety to work with that. That's why we're working in this most often in meditation, because we can get down into really the space where this is all happening at and just zero in on it. Because that's something where, you know, as we've been talking about, the truth of your experience, this is the thing. I mean, no matter what it is that I say about it, it's what's it end up being for you. You know, I can say that you can look at a feeling as the subject of response to an appearance, but then what the hell does that mean? But fortunately, you know, in these meditations and so forth, we can get at that. We can get at having an experience of that and understanding it and knowing it in such a way that it actually helps us realize, at least to me, one of the huge benefits of all this, which is to suffer less. You know, to suffer less, to have a greater sense of peace about it. You know, just in the moment of, seeing 3 cop cars, that there was a feeling that was somewhat somber that went through me. But yet, fortunately, trying to put these things into practice, there was already a particular practice I started going through in my mind about as to who possibly died and so forth, that wasn't taking me into wasn't spiraling me down into a further dark space where I was just kind of caught up in my own darkness. But actually, I had some space there where I felt some light as to what to do with this. And then it got really bright when I saw it was Santa. I was like, wow, didn't even plan on this. It's shifting so quickly. Yes. So yeah, the feelings, I think one of the other ways I know we did really get into was this kind of primal experience of, that feelings are a primal experience of liking, disliking, and indifference, this plus minus zero. It's kind of going on all the time. And that the indifference, which is an important distinction, that the indifference is not just the absence of liking and disliking. It is a response. And that becomes more meaningful, actually, when you're able to identify that that's what's arising, and how to work with that differently. So this is a question that came up as I was, thinking about this, going back over this material, which is, we experience feelings directly, so why the hell do we need to do all this investigation of them? All this deep probing as to what's going on in there. And there are several, actually, I would say, very strong reasons for doing so. One of which being that because we really have to find out what we truly believe we think is going on when we immediately label something as being pleasurable, displeasurable, or indifferent, whether we think that that is really a quality that is inherent in that object, in the appearance, or do we think it's a subjective response? And that's something to be tested time and time again. Most of the time most of us might sit here and say well, yeah, most of the time I do think it is. It's immediately in that object. It's immediately in that person. You know how she is. You know how he is. This is what he does. This is what he, self-existently does every single time and has for all eternity. We'll react that way, we'll do this, and so forth. So that's why, that's one of the reasons why, is to get in there and look at that and think ooh, okay, that is what I really do believe. I don't think it's just some subjective response to an appearance that's going on. So that's certainly one of them. And fortunately, with this whole approach of shamatha and vipassana, which is the technical name of this approach, and basically shamatha is simply a meditative state that deals with clarity and stability, just being really stable and clear in your attention. And the vipassana aspect is really investigating something of import in your mind. So what this entire approach does in respect to feelings as we were looking at it last week, is that it goes about eliminating two huge delusions. And one is just exactly what we were just talking about, which is that it looks immediately, if we think that the plus minus zero, that the pleasure, displeasure, indifference is completely attributed to the appearance. So that's the first delusion right there, that it's trying to dissolve that. And then of course the second one, and you know, might be even more important for you, is that it looks at eliminating whether we think our feelings completely constitute our identity. You know, why I think I am who I am, my feelings. This is how I feel about this, you know, and that's it. That's who I am, because based on that. And, you know, fortunately, on the most basic level, thank goodness that's not the case. You know, if you, I mean, think about it. If you basically comprised your whole identity by what you were feeling. You know, obviously there are people that are institutionalized and on severe medication for this, because you would be shifting. Oh, now I'm happy, now I'm a little sad, and I'm pissed, you know. You know, that identity would just keep morphing with each and every feeling that was arising. And, you know, for those that, you know people with multiple personality disorders and so forth, you know, this is kind of a, you know, living hell. You know, it certainly does not seem to be a life of contentment. You know, in a way in which you can really be in society, even when that might be fairly disagreeable. And this is the thing about when it comes to the pleasurable feelings, that what we really want with the pleasurable feeling, we want the feeling. We don't really want the object so much. It's really the feeling. Yet we believe that possessing the object gives us the feeling. And that is therein the fundamental misunderstanding that we're trying to work with here. That the feeling comes with whatever I buy or possess, be it the new car or the new lover. It's as though it's baked in the package. Ah, yes, happy, you know, the iPhone, guaranteed, you know, or your money back. I don't know if any of those products actually does that. You know, if you could actually show them and be like, I'm just not happy with this. Pardon? Nordstrom does. Someone had to catch on to it. Yeah, I mean, this is fundamentally what we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And that, you know, and that whole process that we were talking about, for instance, when Marina last week was looking at that color and that shape on the wall, and she was building up this whole association of what was positive and what was negative and so forth. That whole reflexive process that's going on, you know, was going on for all of us who were there, is it entails grasping. I mean, there is something that is being attached to, and it's so amazing here, literally the shape of a triangle in the color red with like this wonderful time in my life. You know, and what would be, you know, interesting for Marina is like looking into that to be able to explore that. You know, what is that that's clutching on in there? Because she was able to just make a distinguishment between it when she looked at the other color like yellow, and she's like, yeah, I didn't really care anything about that. Or Geneva, what was it? You're like, yeah, none of these are really doing anything for me. Although it seemed like, didn't gray start to pique your interest?
Well, I started to get myself interested in it because, like, I'm bored.
Yes, that's it, boredom.
So then I started getting into the strokes to fill in the shape.
Yeah.
And then, because they were all hand-drawn, so I was looking at the sort of subtleties of the shape.
So that's interesting because looking at that in terms of, like you said, you were bored. So it's like, what else is kind of more interesting here? You know, so there was something within that experience where you were grasping to something like, oh, you know, maybe the stroke, the texture will interest me. So this is, I mean, this is an important question. Why is it that we grasp like this? Why do we grasp? Why do you think we grasp to appearances, objects like this? Mark?
We grasp to objects like this because we think that they're going to make us feel a particular way.
Mm-hmm.
And we're unclear that they don't.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So why do we keep grasping then? Why do we keep doing it?
Well, because I think it's our level of unclarity, our level of ignorance. You know? I mean, the more that you understand that there is nothing out there ever that's going to make you happy, you're going to keep, I mean, you know, I've been here for 4 years and I still think the iPhone is going to make me happy. Happier.
Happier, okay.
But I also know now. I mean, the difference between then and now is I really know it's not going to make me happy, and yet I still want it.
Yeah.
But I'm aware of, you know,
What's going on?
what's going on.
Yeah. And that's huge. That's huge in and of itself.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I don't think it's about not wanting things.
Right.
It's just when you suffer about wanting things.
Yeah, and what seems to be causing the suffering is that's it.
Yeah. Yeah.
The iPhone is it. And you know, part of, I mean, you know, the iPhone is really, I remember when someone who comes to the center as well, I remember when she got whatever the latest version of the iPhone was, and I remember her showing it to me, and oh my God, it was amazing the kind of sensuality she had, and just holding it. You know, she was like, oh, she's like, just look at it. It's so light and kind of sexy, and you know, I just love the feel of it, and you know, and all of that is just a given. I mean, we're sensually oriented beings. You know, most of the time we're operating with what's the level of gratification of my senses going on right now, you know.
Yeah, but I think the biggest stimulus there is you want, you know, the energy you put into getting that gratification. So you're working so hard to get that, you realize, oh, I really don't want that. Right? It's just an item, you know.
Yeah.
But prior to getting that, it's like the dog, the greyhounds chasing the rabbit. You know, if they ever catch it, they're done. It doesn't be any good. But that whole, you know, carrot at the end of the stick that they need to get. I mean, that's what you look at in terms of trying to really grasp these things. We really don't know where to get it. So,
Yes.
I think it's part of our culture in terms of how we're brought up. And how we're all told we need to feel this about that. We need to get this to get that, and you know, so with this constant reaching for shiny objects, that when you get it, it's not so shiny.
Yeah. Absolutely, and that points right at how we are so deeply habituated to putting ourselves in that suffering cycle, you know, with each and every. I mean, the other night, a cousin of mine just moved into a huge new house, you know, and had to, because it was so huge, had to buy all this new furniture and so forth. And his brother was staying at his house, and his brother ended up scratching the fridge. And
Oh no.
yeah, right.
Scratch a fridge. Yeah.
These are the mysteries of the universe. Literally, and his brother freaked out, freaked out on him. And what's interesting, right, and as we were going through the whole, just him recanting the whole experience, what really became so clear was that, I kept saying to him that I said, if you choose to, you can feel a little bit of empathy for your brother in this, because you realize how much he invests his happiness in these things. I mean, he knows this about him, that he very much does invest a level of happiness in the material goods and so forth of his life. And I said, and in a situation like this, you can just look at it, it's like, and Chris got this right away. He was just like, yeah, what happens with the next scratch?
Chris is the one who scratched or the one who owned?
Yeah, he's the one that scratched. He's like, what's going to happen with the next scratch? And it's just like, well, it seems to be that there's the behavior that's going in there. And of course, this can go into all the deeper levels of, how it is that you're operating, but it's exactly that we're so deeply habituated to it. And fortunately, with this approach, it gives us this practice, this way of being able to not only then observe ourselves, but also in relationship with others. I mean, just like, when my cousin was sharing that with me, I was able to reflect then like, oh, wow, yeah, I can see now. I can see how, I've done that with other items or other people or something like that. And then it just becomes that. Once you start to recognize and you have some sense of how this is working, then there's something to work with, as opposed to just still being deluded, It's like, and this is no negative reflection on my cousin who got so upset about that. For him, that is a real concern. And and fortunately his brother was respecting that. They don't share the same view, but he's respecting that's what's going on for him. And then of course then becomes the negotiation of how to then work with that, and fortunately with this, this approach, you're able to start shifting your attitude and your mindset in such a way that is what's going to directly correlate to your actual actions and the way you're behaving in the world. By starting here, starting at that level of the mind. Fortunately, it seems to work that way for many, many years now. Yeah, and that was one of the telling lessons as he shared this whole story, is that even when you start to realize that your feeling response isn't inherent in the object, you're still going to feel. You're going to still feel plenty.
Yeah, what's up with that?
Well, I think this is what it points to what Mark was getting at, which is that when you're still feeling what might be like total aggravation and so forth, there's the big difference on one level of just being knowing that it's not in the object, and that the reason that one of the reasons why you're getting so upset is because of this attachment that you have to it or the person. And that how the feeling is a response to that attachment, that there's this something in it, like if it is, it's like when your iPhone, like when Mark had this one awesome moment, he jumped in the pool and so forth, and we're having a good time, and after what, it was about 5-10 minutes, he was like, oh man. And he pulled it out. I mean, just in that moment of like those feelings that are going on right there, and it's not to say that, okay, now you got to go into like, necessarily your whole mental analysis, but you might. It might just be calling the mind. What do you say?
But I have to say, I mean, I do, if it weren't for studying what I've studied here,
Mm-hmm.
I might have and probably would have reacted a lot. I mean, I've
Yeah, it's spiritual. I was a witness. I can validate that.
You know, but like when things like that happen now, I have you know, I have space for it. You know?
Yes.
Because I,
Yes.
you know, it's just a phone.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I loved my iPhone 5. It was great. And it's just a phone.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and when things like that happen, I'm able to bring an understanding to it where I'm not like, oh my God, it shouldn't be happening. Oh my God. Oh,
Right.
You know, like,
Right.
stupid me. And what
Yeah.
am I gonna do?
Yeah, and we can call that.
And people start telling me to put it in rice. And I'm like,
Yeah, that's right. But that's great though, because that whole experience, that whole way of how you dealt with yourself, and that you very much could say that that's what it is to act mindfully. You know, that's really to be mindful. You know, there's so many layers there that are being activated of reacting in a mindful way. You know, I realize what's going on. You know, I realize what I'm attached to in this. You know, and even though I know that the happiness is not in that piece of metal, you know, I know that, and I've got these feelings about it. All of that process is really living in a mindful way.
I have some questions about the word grasping.
Mm.
Are we using it in the sense that it's like craving? Or like, because it seems to be having like a negative connotation right now. Like grasping is sort of a cause for suffering or disappointment, or it's the setup, you know, in this scenario. But like, sometimes you're just searching, right? And there's
Yeah.
no like, you're just, I don't know. It's just like you want to live your life and you want to go through a journey and grow and change and evolve. And
Mm-hmm.
so grasping plays a role in that.
It definitely is playing a role. And that role does keep shifting as well. But in terms of, it probably would not be as useful in this context to see grasping as craving, because the craving in this, I think in this regard, would seem more to be more about desire. And here the grasping is really more about that experience or that realization of attachment, which is, and this is really a good point you're illuminating actually, is that renunciation ends up playing a key role in this. And we can say renunciation in the sense of letting go. So that's where the attachment is. And because if you really want to uproot this suffering going on, you know, that's where renunciation comes into play as well. What is it you're letting go of? You know, you're letting go of this way of thinking. You know, you're letting go of this way of behaving. And they say, those who know, having practiced shamatha and vipassana for centuries, is that one of the reasons why, you know, they call it the direct path is that it veritably could be the fastest and least challenging way to develop renunciation, because you are experiencing firsthand through your truth of your experience, the truth of your experience, you're experiencing firsthand how it is happening for you, how it is for you. So it doesn't end up becoming so much of a cerebral analytical exercise, because you're able to validate it from your firsthand experience. You know, which is one of the reasons they call it the direct path. You know, and that's something that for a lot of us, that's where the rubber hits the road. Why? Because I know, I just experienced that. That's how I know. And so it is beautiful how renunciation works into this whole process and this whole way of being with it. And I mean, it certainly is something as well that, it's kind of the point you were bringing up, Mark, or showing, is that when you are reacting in this mindful way and noticing however it is that you're attaching or grasping and so forth, especially with these feelings that arise, is that then your relationship to these feelings can really start to shift. And just to put it quite honestly, and I think in a much more, feelings can serve a much more greater purpose, because now your relationship with unpleasant feelings, I mean, let's really just kind of start there, not even getting at the pleasurable ones, but unpleasant feelings. It's as though, just like when I was saying with what my cousin was doing with his brother, by him being able to acknowledge and respect what it is for him, what his brother's experience of the scratch on the refrigerator is, that in that moment, Chris had the opportunity to be able to take this feeling of aggravation about how his brother was reacting to what's a human thing that's going to happen, which is mistakes happen, accidents happen, that he could take that opportunity of those feelings arising and use those to actually develop some compassion in that moment. Because then he could empathize with the disagreeable feeling that his brother's having. And that right there can be huge for us. When those feelings are arising in such a way and you're not becoming consumed by them, and you're seeing that, oh, this is, yes, I understand, because I feel that too. I feel that too. And there's enough space in there to work with it mindfully. And then it's amazing. I mean, then, man, it's as though, then the pleasurable feelings, then a pleasurable feeling can then lead to generosity, greater liberation, and this is what's interesting to me about indifference. I mean, I think this indifference apathy one is a great one to mine, actually, because you can then take that experience, your deeply habituated experience of indifference and apathy, and then that can start to actually give rise to impartiality or equanimity. In a moment of just like not giving a shit actually becomes meaningful, and you have some sense of equanimity about whatever's going on. Whereas before it's like, I don't care. I don't really care. This life is just way too short. It's way too short for all those moments of not caring. I certainly remember when I was 14, I mean, I thought, that was actually one of the things about being cool, was not giving a shit, was not caring. Then you really do get into this nihilist existential place, twisted sense of existential, of just like, what's the point? Why does it matter? And that's what's beautiful about taking this approach with feelings in that way, the feeling of just indifference, and being able to use it to give rise to that sense of impartiality or equanimity. So that's probably enough about feelings. You can see why it is we could keep going with that, on and on and on. But now we'll get to what's underneath that, what's underneath feelings, which is the mental aspect of feelings, and this is what really brings us into the domain of the mind. I mean, most of us are pretty clear that we we experience the world through our five sensations, but there is this sixth, or five senses, there is this sixth sense, which is mental. And this is amazing, actually, because something simple like what happens when I say your mom? Right, but something seems to be happening. You're having some type of experience. I mean, it might not be hearing her voice or, or feeling her touch or something like that, but some experience is happening, and that would be in the domain of your mind. That would be mental. And that's the kind of relationship we're going to really investigate tonight. It's awesome how, whatever, somebody can write something from thousands of years ago, and you can look at it again and again and again and keep discovering things about it. And so there's one of the texts that's used a lot for this approach is a world-renowned spiritual text that was originally spoken by the historical Buddha, and it's known as the Dhammapada. And this is from the first verse. All phenomena are preceded by the mind, issue forth from the mind, and consist of the mind. So, I mean, that's pretty much, sure. All phenomena are preceded by the mind, issue forth from the mind, and consist of the mind. Which is pretty much that's pretty much the full meal deal of experience. I mean, what else is there really to that? But I mean, specifically, and let's look at this. What is the Buddha getting at when he says all appearances are preceded by the mind? Preceded, exactly. So, whatever. I love using this phrase. Whatever exists out there, which is this appearance, the objects to the mind, is essentially the only experience that we can have with that is our perception of it. So whatever it is that is appearing to the mind, which appears to be, which in that relationship seems to be one in which there is some sense of separation between, me and said object. So that's where essentially, your only way of understanding that is your perception of it. And nothing short of that. And because of that, that's where then everything that appears, to us, to whatever our perception is of it, then becomes part of the mind, then becomes something that is in relationship to the mind. And we'll get into, because it's important to look at, we're going to keep talking about mind, like what that really is, at least in this context specifically. Because it'll be probably most helpful for us to look at it as the mind is the space where these appearances arise. So that's one level. Yeah, I think that's fair to put it that way. And then this is, another way of defining it, is that the mind is the awareness with which we become aware of the world or of life. Yes. It's the awareness with which we become aware of the world, of life. So those would be the two, in this particular approach, those would be when we keep referring to mind, that's it. Because you could say place, the place, but I think that the place where the appearances arise, but that, sometimes we want to make that a physical location, so it seems to me that space is actually more serviceable.
Is it the awareness with which or by which? Because
With which?
with which makes me think that there's the I, and then the I is mine.
Now what do you mean by I?
Like Geneva and Geneva's mind.
Ah, so that they're separate.
Yes.
Okay. Now, do you personally believe that those are interdependent?
Yes.
Okay. Then you can work with that. You can work with that because then they wouldn't be separate. If you believe your sense of self and your mind work interdependently with each other, then that can work. Then that's serviceable.
Okay, but then how is it? Or that doesn't matter. It's just whatever my experience is.
Okay, so wait, let me see if
I'm trying to get the mechanics.
So
Yeah.
when you say things are interdependent,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't have an answer to this, by the way, so just by Geneva's question, and I'm thinking about it, when you say things are interdependent, that does imply two separate things that are dependent upon each other,
Mm-hmm.
which would mean that Geneva and Geneva's mind are two separate things that are interdependent. And I don't know if that's
Yeah, I don't know if
makes
they're
sense
two
to me
se-
or not.
I
I
don't
don't
think
know.
Yeah, I think that's why it gets into your own personal understanding of how you think things are really working for you, like who Geneva is and Geneva's mind, which I think we might need to talk about outside of this class because that's a deep conversation.
We're going down the road.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to bring it back. It was more just like a simple, like the mechanics, like, okay, so if phenomena is preceded by your mind, or the mind, and the mind is the space where these things arise, it was just sort of like understanding the relationship. So,
And I think that's why it might be helpful in that sense to state that they're dependent on each other. That because one of the things that we will get into in the next class is going at that third mark of existence, which is self and no self, and that unpacks that more deeply as to this sense of functional self that is functioning in relationship with mind. And that's why I think, yeah, we would have to have another conversation about that.
Well, I know we're continuing on this, but I do think that they could be separate because Mark's mind perceives you, perceives Geneva, perceives, Lauren, and perceives me. Like, I have my own perception of myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, well, what's the difference between my perception of me and my perception of you? It's still interdependent.
Ooh, this is great because actually this gets into what will be in one of the meditations tonight, actually. This type of investigation. Because it tracks that way. So it'll track that way, Geneva, in terms of this relationship of that in meditation, there will be a question that taps right into there as to like, well, okay, well, just that. Yeah, just that. But thank you for asking that. Yes. Yeah, I mean, that's really what tonight is going to be about, is that getting into understanding the nature of the mind. And the only way that we're going to approach that is by using this aspect of shamatha, which is attempting to have some stable, clear basis of attention, and then bringing in the vipassana aspect of actually investigating. You know, then some really juicy questions. And you know, it's only, and this is the thing about this, is that for all of you who have been, you know, working, if not only with these meditations, with other meditations that are related to us, is that it's definitely to be kind with yourself as you're going through it, because the vipassana aspect, you know, this exploratory aspect, it really gets its stoke out of clear and stable attention. So if your attention, your focus is still, you know, yeah, of course. When there's some like deep probing question that comes, you know, that's you're hearing, and then suddenly you're like, what, wait a minute, what? You know, it's, yeah, of course. So, you know, this is just to be patient with yourself, because it really is a part of the combined approach, is that you need that certain level of attention. So in those moments, if it even is for 5 seconds or whatever, then great, because something then can open up, you know, can open up from that question. And it's definitely, it works hand in hand with each other, because now that we're going to investigate, you know, the nature of the mind, is that you're able to really develop that stability and that clarity to actually the even more deeper degree, this vividness, by focusing on these appearances in the mind, just appearances in this domain. Because it's just wonderful that they figured this out all this time ago. They're like, the mind really digs that. Like, ooh, that's interesting. Like appearances, you know, and to your question, to be like just appearances in my own space. If the mind like had a sense of itself, to what you were asking about, is that possible? And fortunately, this keeps the mind interested. And so as you're able to then stabilize that attention more and increase that clarity, then you're able to actually take the vipassana, the insight aspect, and go further and deeper with it. So it's wonderful how they dance together in that way. I mean, really, the choreography has tremendous grace in it, because since it's happening in just like little bits and pieces, you know, where suddenly there's a moment in there's like, oh, and then, you know, then it's back off to, you know, whatever, past, future, something else, a sound. And there's like another moment. And then that grows with practice, you know, with consistent practice. So this is going to be important here, just so we can get into this first meditation. These are primarily going to be, you're going to be allowing yourself, allowing your mind to let the appearances, the mental appearances flow. So let them flow. You know, the Tibetans have a saying about what is that? Let your mind be like a gracious host welcoming unruly guest. That's sweet, unruly guest. But that being said, so if there's a particular unruly guest that you attach to, that your mind attaches to, that's when you want to kick in the much loved 4 R's that have been espoused here for so long, which is, of course, the first is to release it, release that guest, let that guest go wandering off. He or she will fade away like all the other guests do. So you release it, and then pay attention to what happens in that moment of clarity. Right then, that moment right after you release it, really pay attention to that, because that's the moment of noticing, you being able to train your attention to recognize how lucid or non-lucid you are. Like, this is what it's like to be lucid. This is what it's not. You know, and that's wonderful. That's rejoicing. I mean, that's really rejoicing. Noticing, wow, all right, I'm lucid again. Yes. And then you go into the ones that to me seem to always be interchangeable, which is that you can either relax on your exhale or return, and in this point you'll be returning to the still point of your awareness, you know, and it varies as to what works for you in the moment. You know, the tendency is going to be that the behavioral track will be that you'll release, and to have that moment of rejoicing for being lucid again after you release the distraction, that appearance, and then it's like, okay, I need to relax. Or it might be that you return right to that still point, and then you relax more deeply into it. So you just use what works. You know, just use what works. And before this one, as opposed to doing this in the middle of the meditation, which sometimes can happen, so just now, just think of a short, simple phrase that you'll want to recall during the meditation. I mean, it could be simple, you know, something just like love everyone. You know, it doesn't have to be, you know, I mean, I don't know, maybe not cheeseburger and fries. I mean, that'd be kind of interesting. See, I'm already, mine's like, wow, that's different. But yeah, I mean, the whole point of this is that by recalling this short, simple phrase, you're able to then watch this whole cycle of how appearances, mental events arise and abide and fade away, because it has a beginning, middle, and end. So it's a wonderful little mechanism to be able to train the mind in that awareness of how all of these things are really happening anyhow. They're rising, and then they linger, and then they dissolve. And that's good enough. So yeah, so please get in.
We recall that phrase as soon as we realize that we were off our object, and then we recall that phrase.
Well, actually, that is something that you can do. Yeah, if you want to regain your still point, you can always use that phrase to bring you back to your still point of awareness. And there'll be specific points in the meditation where I'll actually prompt you. Hey, Mark, could you do me a favor? Could you bring the bell from the altar there on the left? So.
Are you timing it?
Hmm?
Are you timing this?
No. No, the other one with the bowl. So yeah. Yeah, the bottom as well. Yes, thank you. Yeah, I was going to say yes. If you're chilly at all, thank you. So yeah, so you guys, since you're jumping into this, it's really one of the things that's so awesome about this whole the shamatha aspect about is that it really involves this relaxation, this relaxed sensibility. Yes, this peaceful abiding state of mind that you're getting in. So having this kind of clear, stable attention is really cultivating the sense of relaxation while still being alert and focused. So with this posture, your seating position really plays a big role in that. So you can do, and explore this. As you can see, there's some people seated on cushions. There'll be people lying down. If being in those chairs, one thing you probably want to do is to actually, since they're inclined like this, you want to come towards the front of them and probably have your feet on the ground, actually, initially. This is just starting out. There's a whole bunch of different ways to explore this. And in that way, when you're more towards the front of the seat, it's because it opens up your hips so they're not pinched, which can just be another reason that your body will start to rally against you for like trying to sit still. So once if that feels comfortable and so forth, having your feet flat on the ground, and then with your arms and your hands, just put them wherever's comfortable. I mean, it can just be exactly like that, folded, wherever you just kind of forget about them. And then this is what becomes so very key, is that what's going on with your back. So as you're moving kind of up through your spine, and you really want to start to feel it as being tall and long, you can kind of use this kind of image of just like someone is like pulling a little thread at the crown of your head, just up a little bit, just so you feel nice and tall and long. And then just kind of rolling your shoulders back and letting them rest where they fall. So you don't feel that kind of tension in the back. Like it's like, that's not what this is all about at all. You just see at the same time, you don't want to have the shoulders caving in. So that's why you just roll them back, let them rest where they are, and just feel that kind of length up through the spine. And then this is always good to just kind of check in on the head and just see, that it's not floating about and feels nice and even on top of the spine. So the way you can check in on this is just with the tip of your chin. Sometimes you can, most of us need to kind of dip it down a little bit and to feel actually even and balanced. If it feels too much, if you feel like you're craning too far over, it actually triggers the nervous system to be like, yeah, okay, it's time to go to sleep, and so you want to just have it at a nice, pleasant level that feels balanced. And then comes all of this so important space of the face, and it's just relaxing that, just softening it, So then, as we begin, and for this, it initially will be helpful probably just to have your eyes closed. Because we're so accustomed to seeing the world this way that using the inner vision can be quite refreshing, especially for this particular meditation. And then that's about it. All right. So everyone else feeling nice and comfy. And take a few deep breaths just to relax the body and reinvigorate it. And we will simply begin by listening to the room. And listening without any commentary. And just letting that little commentator inside our mind take a break. So no need to label what you hear or figure it out or to create any story about it. You're just listening with bare attention. And if you become distracted by any thought or sound, gently let go of it. Feel good about letting go of the distraction. Relax on your exhale and return to listening. Just listen to your life. Allow your mind to be at ease with your life for a little while. Distraction arises, gently release it. Rejoice in being clear again. Relax on your exhale. And return to listening. Now begin to draw your focus from the room into your body by placing your attention on any physical sensations that you feel. Whatever it might be, an itch, tingle, just noticing it. No need to diagnose it. Just placing your attention on those tactile sensations as they arise, whether along the surface of the body or within. If you notice a particular sensation that feels painful or feels tense, draw your in-breath into that area of tension and release the tension on the out-breath. And you can keep doing that until you feel it fading away, feeling that tension dissolving. Now begin to pull your focus down towards your connection with the ground and your seat. Just placing your full focus on the feeling of contact between your body and the floor and your seat. focus on that feeling of the warmth of connection, the fullness of it. If a mind becomes distracted, release the distraction. Feel good about releasing it. Relax on your exhale and return to that feeling of connection with the earth, feeling grounded, stable, still. Now let your attention roam throughout the body, noticing any physical sensations wherever they arise. Just observing the sensation. If you notice that you're slipping towards drowsiness or dullness, brighten your attention by focusing on the inhale, and then relax on the exhale. Now feeling relaxed and clear, you add some stability by choosing an object to anchor your attention. So focus on the nasal area and the physical feeling of air entering and exiting through the nostrils. Just feeling the air move through the nose. Cool as it enters, warm as it exits. The key to stability is the exhale. Give it your full attention to the final instant before the pause that precedes the next inhale. So from this base of stable attention, when you hear the bell, shift your awareness to the domain of the mind by recalling your rehearsed phrase. After successfully watching the mental appearance of your rehearsed phrase arise, abide, and adjourn, just continue to remain attentive for whatever appears next. Let awareness hold its own ground. And simply remain an impassive witness to whatever appears in the space of the mind, be it pleasant or unpleasant, without preferring that it stay or go, just let it be. Grasping will announce itself by the mind trying to cling to a pleasant experience or trying to reject an unpleasant one. And if your mind is getting carried away by a particular appearance, release your grasp on the distracting object. Rejoice. Ah, I'm clear again. Return to your still point of awareness and relax even more deeply on the next exhale. And you can return to your still point of awareness at any time by recalling your rehearsed phrase again and in remaining attentive for whatever arises, abides, and dissolves. Now that you've identified the mental objects of this domain, let's add some vipassana inquiry. Do the appearances in this parade of appearances have an identifiable nature? How do they arise? From where do they emerge? Does the present moment of mental experience somehow depend on a previous moment? Can you witness this mental event as it arises, or do you become aware of it only after it has arisen? Once a mental experience is present, use close mindfulness to examine how it abides. Is it fixed in some location, or does it seem to be in motion? Is the mental event stable and static? Or does it seem to be changing moment to moment? Can you witness the entire life cycle of a mental event and see its dissolution as well? Does the appearance disappear suddenly or fade away gradually? Does some force appear to destroy these appearances, or is their disintegration somehow built into them? Try to sense the balance of stillness and motion, witnessing the constantly changing parade of mental appearances while still maintaining a still point of awareness. You can begin to release that focus, Deepen your breath. And gently open your eyes when you're ready. Let's take a break.